Welcome, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and I just want to real quick go over the situation or situ or situs, basically all meaning the same thing. So when we have contracts with the federal government or the federally created state, they have some sort of designation on them as far as where the property is situated, which means where it sits. For example, you see in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, it says the seat of government will be Washington, D.C. And so the seat is where government sits. That's its situation or situs. So here we're looking at 26 CFR, place for filing notice or form. When you file something with the federal government and you use the address that is created by the federal government, you're basically saying that your place is the federal government and that you're under the federal laws, at least for the purposes of the document that you've signed. And so when you file in a federally created state, it eventually ends up in Washington, but you're under the federal laws. So in 26 CFR, Internal Revenue Code, the Department of the Treasury, Procedure for Administration, so on and so forth, it mentions several times the situs or situation as related to the governmental subdivision, because everyone has their choice of government and their choice of law. If you register for your choice of law to be under the federal government, then it will situate you within that federal sphere of authority, meaning that you then come under the federal government and you therefore are a taxpayer. Your property is also situated on within a governmental subdivision. So a governmental subdivision allows the government to expand its jurisdiction beyond the federal lands so that it can contract with you, bring you in under its laws by way of that contract and your Voluntary Positive Act, which is your signature on their forms and papers. So it says, basically, when you register your property with the federal government, you use your address, and when you fail to pay taxes, they collect by lien on your property, or they lien your property and later collect. So that you're giving them the right to take your property by way of contract if by some chance you choose not to pay the tax that you agreed to pay. So the property subject to the lien is deemed situated under the provisions of paragraph B1 of this section. Personal property. In the case of personal property, whether tangible or intangible, the notice shall be filed in one office within the state. Now it's talking about the federal state, as designated by the laws of the state, the federal state, in which the property subject to the lien is deemed situated, or your contract is filed with the federal government, under the provisions of paragraph B2 of this section. Let's see, here it says, and the notice shall be filed in the office of the clerk of the U.S. District Court for the judicial district in which the property subject to the lien is deemed situated under the provisions of paragraph B of this section. So when you file and you put that federal address, you're stating that your address is situated within this federal sphere, the governmental subdivision or political subdivision, as it were. Furthermore, because the situs of real property is deemed to be at its physical location, the notice of lien also continues to be effectively filed with respect to A's real property. So the situs of your property. When I looked at the paperwork on a property that was inherited, the appraisal district called the property address the situs. So the situs of the property was the address, and the address is determined by the federal government and the federal state, which is a political subdivision. A tax lien arises against ABC Airline, who owns aircraft situated in state F. So it's not necessarily talking about its actual physical location, but where is the aircraft registered at? Where is its home, which is its paperwork, where its paperwork sits. So as you know, aircraft as well as boats and vehicles are registered, and that registration is filed within the dependent state under the federal government, which leads you back to Washington, D.C. and the Constitution, making everything that you register under federal control. So it is situated within the seat of government, Washington, D.C., that's 10 miles square, 10 square miles, whichever it is. I don't recall. And so then you come under the laws of the federal government and its federally created states within the states. If you just watched my last video, I explained to you through Black's Law Dictionary from 1891 the difference between a federal state, which is a dependent non-sovereign state, and an independent state under the Articles of Confederation. The independent state would be the Republic of Texas, which is a government that the people made for themselves. And the state of Texas is the federal state created by the men in Congress, which is a statement made by one of the congressmen in 1867 or 1868. And it is in the federal record. So once you situate or file the paperwork for your property, you then become a taxpayer, and so you now owe a tax on your property, which goes for education, etc. So you owe a tax, and then if you don't pay the tax because your property is situated under the control of the federal state and the state or the federal government, your property is subject to be taken away if you don't pay the tax, which, of course, we know by now is a big scam. The Federal Internal Revenue Service also has a right to put a lien on your property once you file your paperwork with your signature on it being your Voluntary Positive Act, which allows them to take your property and trade for money that you may not have paid or money that they have deemed that you didn't pay for taxes that you may have owed. So they get you by getting you to sign these contracts that all roads lead to Rome. In this case, all roads lead back to Washington, D.C. And the road is called State of Texas or State of Virginia or whichever. And under Title 23 highways, there are actual roads that lead to the federal government. And of course, they have the address. So they have many ways to contract with you to take from you your property, your vehicle, your land, whichever it is, because they tell you that you have to sign papers, you have to do certain things, when in reality, You don't, because you can choose your form of government. And I've showed you in the Texas Jurisprudence 3rd edition manual where it is acknowledged that the Republic of Texas did not cease to exist when Texas joined the Union. It only agreed to allow the federal government to create an independent or a dependent state inside the independent state, and that dependent state are connected to Washington, D.C., the seat of government, where it sits or is situated, which is a governmental subdivision, or also known as a political subdivision. So all roads lead back to Washington when you file their forms. There's a book here, and I know it's difficult to see. It's on archive.org. I will show you the name of it in a moment. But this is a book from Montana. It says, short title, "This act shall be known and may be cited as the Montana Comprehensive State Insurance Plan and Tort Claims Act. Definitions as used in this act. State means the state of Montana, and this is a lowercase s, or any office, department, agency, authority, commission, board, institution, hospital, college, university, or other instrumentality thereof. Political subdivision means any county, city, municipal, corporation, school district, special improvement, or taxing district, or any other political subdivision or public corporation. Governmental entity means and includes the state and political subdivisions as herein defined. So you have state, and then you have a federal state. So in the political subdivision, it's talking about the instrumentalities, which are corporations created by the state, the original state, lowercase s Montana in this case, and they are the taxing district, county, city, etc. for the state, independent state. But then you have the dependent state, or the federal state, which is a non-sovereign state, which also has its own political subdivision, which is supposed to be on the federal lands, and it is used to bring in people to join the military, bring in civilians to work with the military, and to bring into its land contractors, which work with the military also. And on those federal lands, they have their own political subdivision where it creates its own entities, its own corporations or instrumentalities, either appropriated fund or non-appropriated fund. So not being Montana, but talking about Texas, because everyone knows Texas has a Republic of Texas, or at least they believe it did have a Republic of Texas. You have Republic of Texas being the independent state, and State of Texas being the federal dependent state, each having separate political subdivisions, and the people off the federal lands come under the Republic of Texas, and the people on the federal lands come under State of Texas. But what has happened is the federal government has expanded itself and allowed itself the power to contract with people through its public corporations or its instrumentalities to basically siphon money off of them, which is a scheme or a scam, which I've been hearing more and more people talk about, this entire system being a scam. I don't believe that the founders intended it to be a scam. I don't believe that they created something that was a scam, but the way that it has been expanded, the way that it has been indoctrinated into us being something beyond what it was intended, that we just come to believe that the form of government we have is the true form of government, but it's not. It's a vastly expanded government that goes way beyond the confines of the Constitution. And I recently read to you the Black's Law Dictionary definition of federal government in a previous video, the one I posted just before this one, where it specifically talks about the Confederate States and the non-Confederate states. So when Lincoln allowed for the Civil War to occur, because the Civil War didn't occur just on its own, it was exacerbated and, in my opinion, created by the federal government for the railroads. So the railroads wanted a civil war so that they could take over the independent states, because for one, they didn't want to have to pay people for their private property to build railroads, because private property belonging to the independent states were not subject to being purchased by the federal government. So the people owning the private property, not federal lands, but in the independent states, did not want to sell their property, and the railroads didn't like that. And if they did want to sell their property, they were selling it for a very costly amount, which the railroads did not like that. And as we know, Lincoln had worked for the railroads before he became president. And later he sold some of his lands to the railroad. So it's just good to know all this information and be able to put it all together so that we can better understand what is a independent state, which is the states we're in, unless you work for the military or you're in the military, a member of the military, in which you're on federal lands. And in that case, you're within the dependent state. And so what we have to understand then is that these federal people who are making contracts with us and telling us we have to sign these forms, that they are lying to us and propagandizing to us, and they're using the years and years of indoctrination we've had in the public school system to make it easier for them to do that. So this is just another video on how you are, in fact, free, sovereign, and independent, and that when you register with the federal government, you're bringing yourself and all your property and your children in under the dependent state, which the highway leads directly to the seat of government, Washington, D.C., bringing you in under all the federal laws, to which they pretend to have a lot more authority than they actually do. With that, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Leave a comment in the comment section. You can ask questions. I try to answer questions if I have the answer. If not, I can try to find the answer for you. But stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.